Okay, I wanted to make sure to talk to you about fungi, as they are incredibly important to plants. And I know that you've done a little bit of investigating the other week with fungi, and hopefully you'll get to reap some edible fungi in the near future here. When we think about fungi and how they interact with plants, there's a couple of key ways that this happens. One way is this idea of endophytes. And endo means within, and remember PHYTE in science means something that is plants related or plant like. So fungal endophytes means that these are fungi that live inside the plant body. And there are actually a lot of bacteria that do this too. So it's very analogous to our body, how we have many, many bacterial species that live in us and on us and are actually doing very good things for us every single day. The definition is that they live in the plant tissue but do not cause disease. And so they're just a normal part of the plant body, and they spend most of their entire lives inside the plant or on the plant. Endo is referring more to the inner fungi inside the plant body. So they could be inside the root tissue, stem tissue, leaf tissue, any portion of the plant body like that. So they think this is a win-win relationship. The fungus certainly does get a nice home to live in, gets shelter, gets access to nutrients from the plant body. And in return, we're finding out that the plant receives many different benefits. I'm listing some here. They seem to help the plant fight off pathogens that are trying to attack the plant. They help the plant against bunny rabbits and other organisms that come along and try to chew on the plant. They spit out certain metabolites and chemicals that herbivores find distasteful or toxic. They can also help the plant deal with abiotic stress, which is looking at the idea of what's their environment like. Are they experiencing drought, too much heat, too much salt, toxins, heavy metals, for example? And we find that plants that have certain endophytes are much more able to tolerate these types of stressors. Mineral nutrients. So when we think about the soil environment, that's where the plants are getting their minerals. And we find that the ability of the endophytes to help the plants get access to the minerals and then get them to the right part of the plant tissue all can be benefited by the fungal endophytes and bacterial endophytes. So this research or this knowledge on endophytes is relatively new. It is not something that has been heavily investigated until just recently. And so we're pretty confident there's going to be a lot more to discover with regard to the benefits of fungal endophytes. So when you look at endophytes, um, some endophytes have coexisted with the plant for a very long time, to the point where they might not really be able to live outside of the plant body by themselves. And so that begs the question, well, then how do endophytes get into the next plant? You know, if it can't live all on its own, how is it getting into the plant? And what they're discovering is some endophytes actually are found in the seed. So as the mother plant, so there's an endophyte in the mature plant. And as that mature plant starts to produce seeds, some endophytes can migrate into the developing seed. So as the seed is developing, the fungal endophytes get there and they get incorporated into the seed. So that way, when the seed is released and gets deposited somewhere and starts to germinate, the endophyte is already there with it. And so that's a great strategy to make sure that the next generation has the proper endophytes ready to go and can immediately start helping the plant host. So that is really saying that endophytes can migrate through the plant body. We just saw how some endophytes can migrate into the developing seed. They've also done some very nice tracking. Here you're looking at some images where uh, I believe these are the bacteria they were tracking, is, and it's the bright green that you see in these images. It's able to be moving into the plant, and then it starts to move through the plant body. And so in this case, this study was actually looking at the rice plant, and they could see that it got in through the root from the soil, actually in the root hair area. And so that's what you're seeing in figure B here, that it's actually in the root hair. And then it starts to get into the main taproot, and then starts to work its way up the stem, and then is finally inside the leaf tissue in the E and F images here. And so we now know that many endophytes can do this. Most endophytes are coming from the soil environment. Sometimes they come from the air and they float onto the leaf surface and can get through the stomata as well. But it seems like most are coming from the soil environment. But once they're in the root, they can then migrate through the plant body. They don't have to stay put just in the root tissue. So hopefully you've watched that video already on the jewels of the jungle with Dr. Gary Strobel, who has been nicknamed the Indiana Jones of the fungus hunters. And here you're looking at some of his plates of fungi that he has isolated from a variety of different plants from around the world. So he is looking for endophytes in many different plant species on many different continents, and he would then send those leaf and stem specimens back to his lab, and then the army of researchers would start to um, grow any microbes that were in the leaf or stem tissue, and then test those for their abilities for drug discovery. He's mainly interested in looking at drug discovery. And so this idea is bioprospecting. When they use that word, they're looking at drug discovery. Are any of these endophytes that are found in plants, are they capable of producing novel drugs that we could then benefit from in human and animal health? And one thing that they have been discovering is that plants are well known for producing all kinds of different chemicals that have been made on to, drug therapy for humans and other animals. And what they're finding is that the host plant and the endophyte, sometimes they produce the exact same chemical. And so this chemical that's being shown here, Taxol, that is a classic example of that situation, where there are yew trees that were first discovered. In the bark of the yew trees, they produced this Taxol drug, which is an extremely effective and potent breast tumor cancer drug that can put people into remission. If they have a certain type of breast cancer, this drug can put them into remission. So extremely successful for certain types of breast cancer. So once this was discovered, people started going out and cutting down all the yew trees to harvest the stem tissue so that they could get this Taxol drug. Well, uh, Gary Strobel and one of his colleagues said, well, maybe it's not the yew tree making this drug, maybe it's actually endophytes inside that are doing it. And so they actually went to these yew trees and started sampling. And what they discovered is that there is an endophytic fungus in the bark of the yew tree, and it is also producing this Taxol drug. And of course, it's much easier to isolate the fungus, grow it up in a lab environment to huge quantities so that it produces massive amounts of Taxol, and it's easy to isolate and purify, much cheaper, and that way we don't have to keep cutting down yew trees to get at this very important drug. And so his research into the endophytic fungi of yew trees really, I think, probably saved the yew tree from going to probably extinction if we didn't step in and do something about that. And so that's a classic example of the idea that some endophytes are producing the same chemical that the tree itself is producing. And in many cases, it's so much easier to work with the endophytic microbes than it is the actual tree if you're trying to isolate large quantities of that chemical. As you can see, this chemical is quite complex. Sometimes the endophytes inside the plant body will produce chemicals that the host just simply doesn't. And so these are natural products that the bacteria or the fungi are making, and the plant is relying on those endophytes to do it, and so they won't do it themselves. And so what they're finding, again, these are many fungal samples that were isolated from Dr. Gary Strobel. They're finding out that many of these endophytes can produce multiple different chemicals that can be very beneficial for animal and other and human health. So endophyte research is really in the initial stages. There's so much more that needs to be done in this realm, but they think it's incredibly important for novel drug discovery. They're looking at drugs. So far, they found endophytes being capable of producing drugs that are antibiotics, antiviral, anti-cancer, insecticidal, and the list goes on and on. And so one of the quotes that I read in a paper I thought was spot on when they were talking about all of the loss of forests, especially the tropical rainforest, and that not only is it sad that we're losing the trees and the plants in the tropical rainforest, but when that plant species disappears, so too does the entire suite of associated endophytes. And so it's a huge loss, more than what most people realize when you think about the loss of the tropical rainforest. Dr. Strobel has been very successful at going to many different tropical rainforests and finding endophytes with really good drug making capabilities. So, okay, so that is one realm. When you think about how fungi interact with plants, there's many fungal endophytes that are very beneficial to many of their plant hosts. Another very important topic when you think about fungi and plants is mycorrhizal relationships. This is a cover of a textbook, and it's showing a conifer seedling just germinating and growing very young, and it's focusing in on the root system. And here you can see where you see the kind of the more yellowish tissue, that's root tissue. And then all of this whitish tissue around it, that's mostly fungal hyphae growing off of the root. And so mycorrhizal is referring to anytime you see MYCO in a word, that's referring to fungus or something that's like a fungus. Mycorrhizal is referring to root. So this is a fungus root symbiosis. We know that there's many different fungi that can do this type of relationship with plants, and so they have it classed into different mycorrhizal types here on the far left. I'm going to talk about just two of them. The first two listed, the arbuscular mycorrhizae and the ectomycorrhizae. These are fungi that will associate with plant roots, and again, it's a win-win relationship where once the partnership is established, they both benefit from that partnership. So let's I'm going to first get into the ectomycorrhizae. And when we think about those types of relationships, so the types of fungi that form ectomycorrhizae are called ectomycorrhizal fungi. And most of the plants that you see in this area of the country, in the temperate areas of the country, most of the trees, most of the shrubs that you see in this area have this type of relationship with fungi on their root system. And it can be angiosperms and gymnosperms that will have this type of relationship. And then as you go further south from where we are, there are some tropical trees, for example, that also have ectomycorrhizal fungi on them. So it's not exclusive to temperate regions. It's just that we happen to have many of our temperate trees and shrubs are very well colonized by the ectomycorrhizal fungi. So ecto means on the surface. So what we're thinking about here is that when you look at the roots, so if you find a tree as you're hiking around in this area and you see a tree that's been blown over and the roots are exposed, I encourage you to go up to them and look very carefully at the root systems. And you may see something like this, where you will see root systems that tend to have this Y-shaped pattern on the finer roots. And the Y-shaped pattern like that is a dead giveaway that you're looking at mycorrhizal roots. And so this lighter tissue here that you're seeing, that's all fungal hyphae that have grown on the surface of the root so tightly and so compactly that it forms like a tissue-like growth. So it's very much almost like the consistency of a mushroom that you eat on your pizza. It's that when you eat a mushroom on your pizza, that's just fungal hyphae that's been grown very tightly together and compacted into that mushroom shape. So that's how they grow on the surface of the root. The hyphae just totally surrounds the root, grows very densely, and often you'll see the root will actually form this Y-shaped configuration once it's getting colonized by the fungus. Here on the lower left is a good image showing that the fungal hyphae can come off the root surface, and then you have to imagine those fungal hyphae then penetrating into the soil system off of the root. And then here you're seeing an image where if you carefully dig up the soil around a plant root, you can often see all the fungal hyphae in the root system, in the soil system around the root. And then this lower image is looking at roots that have been well excavated. All the soil has been removed. And again, if you look very closely at these smaller lateral roots, you can see that many of them look thicker. They have that Y-shaped pattern. That's all indicative of a mycorrhizal, ectomycorrhizal relationship. So if you see the word ectomycorrhizae with the AE on the end, that just means that they're talking about the fungus root. And so all of these are examples of ectomycorrhizae. And so you can see here, there's different colors. That's due to the different species of the fungi. And so you can see some fungi are looking very black when they are colonizing the surface of the root. Some are more peach colored or tan or white. But you can see how they thicken up the root quite a bit because they're growing so densely on the surface of the root. So if you take one of those roots in cross section and look at them, you would see something like this, where all of that fungal hyphae that's growing on the root, that's what the artist is trying to show here. And that's called the mantle. I believe there is a slide further on showing that word, but let me see if I can write that down right here. Mantle, M-A-N-T-L-E, mantle. And so that thick covering is called the fungus mantle. And then, of course, there's also hyphae that will radiate off the root and go out into the soil. Ectomycorrhizae also will grow into the root tissue. So what they're trying to show here is that the hyphae is growing in between the root cells. Okay, so they're just hanging out in the cell wall space and growing in between. All right. So here in figure B, what you're seeing is that once the fungus starts colonizing the roots, it shifts the root morphology from, rather than being straight, like you see on the left side of the root, that's not being colonized by the fungus. On the right, you're seeing that the root will actually start to morph into a Y shape as the fungus is growing on it and interacting with it. So again, that's a dead giveaway that you have an ectomycorrhizal root when you're looking at that Y-shaped pattern. Here again, you can see on the left image, on the top is if it does not have a mycorrhizal fungus, you can see how the roots just grow straight. And then on the bottom, the same species of plant, its roots are well colonized, and you can see a big major visual difference in how it looks once the fungus is colonized. And then all these beautiful images on the right here, looking at different species of plants and their different fungal partners. So many different types of fungi can form this relationship. And so it's not unique to a particular fungus. There's many different fungal species that will form this relationship. If you look again in a cross section of the root, and you can see the fungal hyphae growing in between the root cells, that pattern of growth is called the Hartig net. It's named after Dr. Hartig, And so when they say, oh, look at that heart net, which what they're referring to is all the fungal hyphae that is inside the root tissue growing in between the cells. And so all of those kind of darker green, that's all fungal hyphae. And then this image again is really nice. It's showing that really thick, dense fungal hyphae around the root surface. And then you can see the blue in between the root cells. That's all the heart net. All right. And then many of these fungi, when they want to go through reproduction, they'll form a mushroom. So if you're out hiking around and you see mushrooms at the base of a tree, chances are that mushroom is being formed from ectomycorrhizal fungi that are in a symbiotic relationship with that tree. This particular fungus is called Lucaria bicolor, which is one of the fungi that I studied for my PhD research. It's probably one of the more heavily studied ectomycorrhizal fungi out there. Okay, so ectomycorrhizal fungi means that they grow very heavily on the surface of the root. I liked working with them because it was really easy to tell if a root system had this type of fungal relationship just with the naked eye. Let me switch over now and talk to you a little bit about endomycorrhizal fungi. They are another group. They have a couple of different names. Some people refer to them as endomycorrhizal fungi. They're also called VAM fungi, which is short for vesicular or buscular mycorrhizal fungi. And then some people drop off the V portion and just call them AM fungi. So it depends on who you're talking to or what you're reading, how they're going to refer to them. So the reason they're called vesicular or buscular mycorrhizal fungi is when you look at them under the microscope, they will form, the fungal hyphae will form what we call arbuscles. If you look up that word, it means dwarf tree. So all of this is just fungal hyphae, this lower image on the right too. Doesn't that look like a dwarf tree? That's all fungal hyphae inside the root tissue. And so that's an arbuscle. And then a vesicle is simply fungal hyphae that is ballooned up. It forms a vesicle, or a kind of almost a circular pouch. And so when you look at them under the microscope, they have these rather unique uh, morphologies. And so that's why they started calling them vesicular or buscular mycorrhizal fungi. This lower left image is a longitudinal section of a root. And again, you can see the big fat vesicles. And then the finer, where it's labeled number 2, that is arbuscule morphology. So endomycorrhizal fungi means that they can grow really well inside the root tissue. However, if you were to dig up these plants that have the endomycorrhizae, you wouldn't see a fungal mantle around the surface of the root. They grow on the root, the fungal hyphae is there, but it's so sparse that you really can't see it with the naked eye. So endomycorrhizae are actually more widespread on many different species of plants than the ectos. And so they estimate about 80% of all vascular plants have endomycorrhizae, that type of relationship. So so many of them are herbaceous plants that you can think of, tomato plants, grasses, um, grains that we grow for crop production, barley, wheat, on and on. So you think about the plants that are short-lived, live for, a summer. All the herbaceous plants have this type of relationship with fungi. And there are some trees that can also support the growth of endomycorrhizae as well. And then there's some trees that have both ectomycorrhizae and endomycorrhizae type fungi associated with them. If you look at a root under the microscope in cross section, all of the red is the fungal hyphae. And so these are mostly all arbuscles. You see a few vesicles as well. All the kind of balloon-like shape are vesicles. And so what we see is that the fungus grows very lightly on the surface of the root, and then it grows into the root tissue, and it is a little bit more intimate in how it associates with the inner cells. What it does is it grows into the root tissue in the cell wall space, but then it can penetrate the cell wall and actually press up against the cell membrane of the root cell. Now, the way the artist drew this, it looks like the fungus is floating around inside the roots. That is not the case, however. The hyphae, the fungal hyphae, do not penetrate the cell membranes of the root cells. And that's really an important concept I want you to remember, because so many drawings and then the way people state things in writing, it makes it sound like the fungus is totally like invaded into the root cells, and that's not the case. The plant controls the infection, and so the plant will not allow the fungus to penetrate through its cell membranes. If it did, if that accidentally happened, where the fungal hyphae actually bust through the cell membrane, it would set off a defense response by the plant, and the plant would try to kill it. And so just remember, the endomycorrhizal fungi cannot pass the plant cell membranes without risk of getting attacked. And so they call it a controlled infection on behalf of the plant. The plant is really making sure the fungus has some set boundaries and cannot penetrate past the cell membrane. So either when you look at the ectomycorrhizae or the endomycorrhizae, this relationship has been going on for millions of years, and most plants have this relationship. So there needs to be an advantage if this is going to be maintained for such a long evolutionary time. And for sure, they have found many, many advantages. When the plant forms this relationship with these fungi, what they find is that the plant can uptake phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium so much better with the help of the fungus. I've put them in ranked order. Phosphorus is very challenging for a plant in it by itself. To take up phosphorus from the soil, that's challenging. If it has its fungal partner, much easier. And so phosphorus is like the gold thing that fungus, the mycorrhizal fungus, really help the plant get access to, but also nitrogen and potassium. Certainly water. Think about the fungal hyphae now growing off the root surface into the soil, and fungal hyphae is much thinner in diameter than any root, even the finest root hairs, much thinner than even that. And so the fungal hyphae can get into cracks and crevices and nooks and crannies of the soil that roots simply physically cannot get into. And so access to water, access to all these nutrients that the plant roots themselves can't even touch. The presence of these fungi on the root or in the root stimulates seedling growth for sure, just because the plant now has better access to water and mineral nutrients. And we know that many of these fungi can be protective. They can protect the plant physically, like the ectomycorrhizal fungi. They form that really thick mantle, so it's a physical protection for the root, but also chemical. Both ecto and endomycorrhizal fungi can produce chemicals to help protect the plant against pathogens. And the fungus does win as well, because the fungus gets a lot of nutrition from the plant. In fact, when they assess how much sugar the plant gives to its fungal partner, it can be significant. Some studies show 40% of what the plant makes in terms of sugar through photosynthesis, 40% can end up going down into the roots and to the fungal partner. So the fungus is definitely getting fed and fed well. So it's a win-win relationship. And now what they're finding is that when you walk out into a forest and are walking around, you have to appreciate that so many of the trees that you're walking amongst are actually connected via these mycorrhizal relationships. And so that's what the artist is trying to show here, that you have the different colors or the different types of fungi, and that they're able to connect trees through these mycorrhizal bridges, and that the mycorrhizal fungi can help facilitate flow of nutrients and chemicals and help communication between the trees and among the trees and other plants in that forest ecosystem. So the research coming out is really exciting, because it's really showing how when you're walking out amongst all these trees, you tend to see all these individual trees, but you really need to appreciate that they're uh, a community, and they are capable of really sharing all kinds of valuable resources and chemicals underground. You don't see it, but it's happening, and it's largely due to the mycorrhizal bridges between and among all these different plant species. Really fascinating research going on right now. And so I'll talk to you a little bit more about that um, as we get more into the angiosperms and gymnosperms. Okay, so mycorrhizal relationships are incredibly important for the vast majority of plants on the planet. Another type of relationship that's really important are lichens. And so lichens are also, we need to think about fungi for this. And so you looked at lichens a little bit, I think, last week in lab. Lichens are a relationship between a fungus and an algae, a fungus and a cyanobacteria, or a fungus and an algae and a cyanobacteria. It could be all three together. They live in a very symbiotic relationship. And what's interesting is when they grow together, they form a unique morphology that we call the lichen. So if you think about what are they each contributing to the partnership, the algae and the cyanobacteria are capable of doing photosynthesis. So they can provide sugars and other organic molecules important for the fungus. And then, of course, the fungus, often the algae and cyanobacteria are living inside the fungal tissue. And so the fungus provides protection in that regard. They can also degrade rock and mineralize the rock so that they can get minerals from the rock that they can all share, and other growth factors. So another thing that they've just recently discovered is that some lichens also contain yeast species, which yeast are really, they're fungi, but they grow in a unicellular form. They don't have that hyphal growth form. And so they were often overlooked. We didn't know they existed in lichens until relatively recently. And so that actually has helped us understand some mysteries that have been going on with lichens and lichen physiology. Now that we know the yeast is there, it has solved some lingering questions. So what you're seeing here on the left is a lichen under the microscope, and all of the blue is the fungal hyphae. And then the red dots that you see in there, that's all algal cells. The red up top here, that's not algal cells. Those are fungal spores. All right, so you have to look further into the lichen body to find the algae or the cyanobacteria. And these images on the right are what you would see with the naked eye as you're walking around looking at the lichens. This is just a little blurb about the yeast discovery, and this was at the University of Indiana, Purdue, Purdue University. And so I like the quote that she gave. This is an excellent example of how things can be hidden right under our eyes and why it is crucial that we keep studying the microbial world. And so again, the discovery of yeast showing up in the lichen relationship has really been a big advancement in lichen research. Okay, so when they look at all the different lichens that have been studied, these three genera of algae dominate. So Trabuxia, Pseudotrabuxia, and Trentipolia. And then if you think about the type of cyanobacteria that can be found, Nostoc is extremely common. So I would like you to be able to recognize these four genus names as partners in the lichen relationship, because they really are dominating in terms of the types of algae and cyanobacteria. Now, as far as the fungi, there's all kinds of different fungal species that can do this type of relationship with algae or cyanobacteria. And so I'm not going to ask you to memorize those because that's a long list, but basically over 13,000 fungal species have been identified that can form a lichen relationship. So when they grow separately, they grow like a normal fungus. Most of these fungi have that hyphal growth form. The algae tend to be unicellular, same with cyanobacteria. But then you put them together and get them to grow together in a symbiotic way, and they form a very unique lichen body. And what happens is the fungi tend to grow and kind of wrap around and envelop the algae so that the algae are embedded in the fungal tissue. And then some portions of it, you'll actually have fungal hyphae really wrapping around the algal cells. And when they do that, those structures are called soredia. So that's what they're trying to show here in this drawing. These are the green are the algal cells, and they're trying to show the gray hyphae surrounding it. So this is how lichens actually spread into new habitats. So if you can imagine someone walking across this lichen or raindrops hitting the lichen, these soredia will break free and will land hopefully nearby into some suitable habitat and establish a new lichen body. And so that's how they tend to spread in their habitat. So you can also see that the lichen body tends to have areas where they will devote to attaching to the surface. And lichens can attach to pretty much any surface, whether it be rock, the surface of a tree trunk, the asphalt tiles on a roof, you name it, you can find lichens attaching almost anywhere. And so here again, this is under the microscope. You can see the green fungal hyphae, and then all the red dots are algal cells embedded in the fungal hyphae tissue. Here's a close-up of that. Okay, so lichens, this relationship is really interesting because it's a win-win relationship, and they don't have true roots, so they can just attach to pretty much any surface. They don't rely on soil and soil water in order to survive. They can survive in all kinds of different habitats, and um, the trade-off is that they tend to grow very slowly, only about 0.1 to 10 millimeters per year. And so if you go collecting lichens, please respect that they grow slowly, and you really shouldn't take too much of any area of lichens with you because they do grow so slowly. It'll take them a long time to recover from that harvesting. They're also well known for their ability to dry out for long periods of time and essentially go dormant into kind of like a suspended animation. And they can survive extremely tough times under those conditions. They are capable of handling pretty extreme environments as well. You can find lichens in desert environments, the Arctic, alpine mountains, very bare rock, bare soil, rooftops, gravestones. I mean, just if you have been hiking along the breakwall in the lower harbor in the summer, you will notice all kinds of lichens growing on the breakwall. And so you can find them in very, what we would consider kind of hostile or extreme environments. Um, they're super important in ecology in the sense that they're classified as primary colonizers, which means if you think about areas that don't have a lot of life, like bare rock, they can come and start growing on the rock. And they actually can grow inside rocks as well. I'll show you a picture of that in a little bit here. And they're very good at breaking down rock materials. So they secrete all kinds of organic acids and enzymes that help release the minerals out of the rocks. And what they do is through all of that action, it helps to start to build soil in that area. And once that has been going on long enough, then other organisms can come in and be secondary colonizers into that habitat. So lichens that have nostoc cyanobacteria as part of the partnership, there's an extra bonus because nostoc can fix nitrogen, which means they are capable of taking dinitrogen that we have in our atmosphere. We have about what? Our atmosphere is about 80% dinitrogen. And when we say it can fix nitrogen, what we mean is it's taking dinitrogen or nitrogen gas and breaking it down into ammonia, NH3. And that is a form of nitrogen that all living organisms can then use. Typically they'll turn that into amino acids. Dinitrogen, on the other hand, we can't touch that. Like humans, we can't use that. There's only a very special group of bacteria that are able to fix nitrogen, and nostoc is one of them. So that's a definite plus if you have that relationship. So tropical forests in particular, if you have lichens in the tropical forest setting, that's great because it's allowing for the fixation of nitrogen, and that nitrogen will end up in the soils as well. And tropical rainforest soil is well noted for its kind of not a ton of nitrogen, but with the help of the lichens, that can help add some nitrogen in. The Pacific Northwest and the desert and tundra areas are also really if you look for them, lichens are everywhere. And so here in this image, you're seeing images of mountains in Antarctica. So figure A is kind of a zoomed out image, and then figure B is zooming into some of those rocks. And all the kind of black and white and green that you're seeing here, that's lichen. That is actually growing inside the rock because Antarctica is rather hostile, and so they actually will grow into the rock to help survive such a hostile environment. The one thing you should be aware is that lichens are pretty sensitive to air pollution. That is one thing that they struggle with because they have no way to easily sequester pollutants or excrete them out of their body. And so it tends to accumulate inside the lichen body. Here you're looking at a graph showing the city center is at the 0 point. And then as you work your way along the x-axis, you're going out from the city center in kilometers. And then on the y-axis, you're looking at how many lichens are present. And you can see that in this particular case, this was over in England, there were no lichens in the middle of the city. You had to wait until you got to 12, 13 kilometers away from the city center that you finally started to see some lichens appearing. And so if I wouldn't want to live in that city if if that's the case. That's showing that there's some pretty high pollution in the city center. And so I don't know if you've had a chance to really look around too much in Marquette, but if you train your eye and start looking for lichens, they're all over the place here in Marquette, which makes me feel very comfortable that we're living in a pretty healthy air quality here in the Marquette area. They're particularly sensitive to sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere, and that can really knock them down. An undergrad student a couple of years ago, did a nice study back in 2017 looking at lichen density here in the Marquette area. And so I asked if I could borrow some of her images and use that in class because she did a really nice job showing how there are, here she was looking at in the center of Marquette, and you can see we have plenty of lichens. She was looking at the tree trunks on the north side of the tree trunk versus the south side, and you can see that there is this trend, however, that as you get away from the center of Marquette, you do see an increase in lichen abundance. So a little bit, not too much of a difference between north versus south, but these asterisks are saying that they are significantly different from the dead center of Marquette where she was taking samples. So when you look at the lichen body, there are three main types of lichen bodies that we talk about. One is called the crustose type, and that is when you look at them with the naked eye, they'll be very flattened. They grow very tightly to whatever surface they're growing on, whatever substrate that is, whether it's rock or tree trunk. Folios, on the other hand, they call them folios because often they look leaf-like, and they can grow up a little bit off the substrate and almost be kind of more wavy looking to the lichen body. And then fruticose is the third type, where they tend to grow more significantly up off substrate that they're growing on, and often might look like a tiny shrub that kind of look bushy and branched. So those are the three main body morphologies: crustose, foliose, fruticose. So here's some images. This is the fruticose, wolf lichen, which in the notes section I describe a little bit about the history of the wolf lichen, why it's called the wolf lichen, unfortunately. But the upside of this lichen is that it does provide very beautiful dyes for the natural dye industry. Here is another. This is actually more of a fruticose because it grows more upright off. In this case, it's a tree branch. It's a little hard to tell because we're looking down on it, but it is growing more erect off of the substrate. Here you're looking at crustose, where you have the um, kind of crumbly look to the lichen, very tightly adhering to the rock surface. And you can see that they're different colors. This one is more red, whereas this one's more golden. So those are pigments that the lichen is producing, and it's actually kind of a sunscreen effect where these pigments absorb ultraviolet light and help protect the lichen from ultraviolet damage. Here is some lichens on a granite gravestone, very beautiful. Here's some folios. You can see where they look a little bit more leaf-like. They look like the blades of a leaf. Here's another really good example of a foliose lichen, very leaf-like. So I encourage you to train your eye to the lichens. They're really everywhere once you start looking for them, and quite beautiful. This is the species that's heavily colonizes the lower harbor breakwall, Xanthoria elegans. They even did research on Xanthoria elegans on the space station, looking at how space might affect lichens. So I just put this in here. I won't test you on it, but if you're interested, they did some neat research on lichens. And then Ryan Rutherford was one of our master's students who did his master's work looking at lichen communities in the Huron Mountains here near Marquette. And he actually has become quite the lichen expert in the area. And so if you ever want to know more about lichens, look him up. He knows his stuff. All right, so those are the fungal relationships that I wanted to talk about with regard to plant fungus. And I'm hoping that between what you learned in lab and this, that will give you a good appreciation for how important fungi are in the world of plants.